First of all, thank you very much for taking the time to watch this presentation. My name is Beatriz Rodríguez Cuadrado from UNIR, Universidad Internacional de La Rioja, and I'm presenting this work developed in collaboration with Óscar Santos Sopena from the Universidad Politécnica de Madrid. The title of this presentation is A New Paradigm in Language Teaching, the Generation of Adapted Materials through AI. Let me start with a question that many of us have probably asked ourselves. Can AI actually produce reliable assessment materials? In this study, we examine whether generative AI can help us create English assessment materials that are better adapted to the real difficulties of Spanish-speaking learners, particularly in the context of TOEIC Reading Part 5, which focuses on incomplete sentences. In the Spanish university context, standardized tests continue to play a central role in measuring English proficiency, particularly for students who need English for professional and academic purposes. At the same time, tools like ChatGPT and Gemini are completely transforming how we think about material design. So the research question behind this study is straightforward. Can these AI models generate assessment content that is not only linguistically accurate, but also pedagogically sound and sensitive to the real difficulties that the Spanish-speaking learners face? Now, answering the questions requires us to consider what the theoretical background already tells us about AI in education. As Pérez Paredes argues, AI opens up countless opportunities both inside and outside the classroom. But at the same time, as Pinto and colleagues point out, there are real risks, fabricated information, trying bias, or ethical concerns around authorship. So, on the one hand, AI offers opportunity in language education. On the other hand, researchers warn us about risks. This is why our goal is not just to generate items quickly, it's to test whether AI can support assessment responsibly, with appropriate validation. This study is also connected to the Justicia project, coordinated by Ongawa, which encourages critical reflection on AI in relation to global inequality and climate crisis. So this work is framed not only by pedagogical goals, but also by an ethical commitment to responsible AI use. So the main objective is to examine the potential of generative AI for developing adapted English assessment materials, specifically targeting the difficulties of Spanish-speaking learners. It is broad and exploratory. From that, two secondary objectives emerge. First, to evaluate whether ChatGPT 5.2 and Gemini 3.0 can generate high-quality TOEIC-style Part 5 items. And second, to determine whether AI models can also function as a reliable validation method for assessing the quality of both AI-generated and human-written content. In terms of methodology, the process had 4 key stages. First, we compiled a learner corpus. Second, we analyzed those responses to identify recurrent errors linked to the first language interference. This work draws on an early study with my co-author. Third, we used those error patterns to design specific prompts for ChatGPT and Gemini. And fourth, the generated items were evaluated using a structured rubric by both AI models and expert judges. We also set up 2 comparison groups. Group A, the AI-generated questions, and Group B, human-written items taken from the Collins practice test for the TOEIC test, which is the reference book we used for this research. One thing we want to stress: the errors come from real learned data. Verb patterns, false friends, collocations, all grounded in authentic L1 transfer difficulties. Let me say a bit more about the corpus. we compiled real responses from Spanish-speaking engineering students from UPM completing mock TOEIC Part 5 tasks. From that data, we identify and classify the most frequent transfer-related error types. Why does this matter? Because it means the prompts given to the AI models were based on real learner needs, not on intuition or guesswork. We evaluate the quality of the generated items through a rubric initially designed by ChatGPT and validated by experts in TOEIC teaching and test preparation. The purpose of this rubric was to transform expert judgment into measurable empirical data, making the evaluation systematic and replicable. As you can see, the rubric consisted in 5 categories: alignment with the TOEIC format, linguistic accuracy, clarity and precision, communicative authenticity, and comparability with human written items. Each category was scored on a 4-point scale. Now, I'd like to briefly outline the 3 key steps in the data collection and item generation process. Step 1. We collected data from 49 students in mock exam 1 and 41 students in mock exam 2, all completing TOEIC Part 5 tasks. Step 2. From those responses, we identify 16 L1 transfer error types. And step 3. Both ChatGPT and Gemini generated 16 TOEIC style items, one for each error type. So in the end, there were 3 parallel sets of 16 items: human written from the Collins book, ChatGPT generated, and Gemini generated, all evaluated by ChatGPT, Claude, and 2 expert judges using the 5-category rubric. Now let's look at what we found. The numbers speak quite clearly. The human written items from Collins scored a mean of 1688 out of 20, ChatGPT scored 1975, and Gemini scored 1956. So both AI models significantly outperformed the human written comparison items, and they did so with remarkable consistency. When we break this down by evaluation parameter, the picture becomes even more interesting. The AI models scored higher across all 5 categories. But the biggest gap was in communicative authenticity, where the human items scored notably lower. This is particularly striking because you might expect published materials to excel precisely in this area. One of the most compelling aspects of this study is the cross-validation. We had ChatGPT and Claude, 2 completely independent AI models, evaluate the same items using the same rubric with no shared context. And what happened? They converged. Both models identified the same human-written items as low quality, and remarkably, both flagged them as likely AI-generated, even though they were taken from a published TOEIC book. This cross-model agreement significantly strengthens the reliability of the evaluation instrument. Let me give you the specifics. 3 human items, errors 4, 6, and 7, received notably low scores from ChatGPT, between 11 and 13 out of 20. When Claude evaluated them independently, it arrived at very similar scores, 17, 12, and 12 respectively. And in all 3 cases, Claude concluded that these items were probably or almost certainly generated by AI. So what are the main conclusions? First, both ChatGPT and Gemini demonstrated a very high capacity to generate TOEIC-style items, performing at least as well as, and often better than, the published human materials. Second, large language models are effective tools for assessment material generation. And third, the cross-validation with Claude confirmed that the rubric produces consistent, replicable results, regardless of which AI model applies it. In terms of broader implications, AI enables more personalized learning, systematic material organization, and adaptation to different learner profiles. At the same time, we want to be transparent about limitations. The data set is relatively small, the task is restricted to type part 5, and the rubric was designed specifically for this study. What makes this study distinctive is that it proposes a validation method that is systematic and potentially replicable in studies about corpus, language assessment, and generative AI. Before I close, I want to briefly address something that runs through this entire study. When AI-generated items match or exceed human quality, we need to rethink who the author of an assessment really is. Responsible AI requires transparency in how tools are used. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. You will find our contact details on the screen.